Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about the massive landslide happening in Rancho Palos Verdes, California, located in Southern California. According to the mayor, this is the largest active landslide currently ongoing in the continental US, and it's truly enormous. Now, let's start with the evacuation area designated by city officials as of August 31st, 2024. This area is quite large, affecting approximately 450 to 500 homes. Let's take a look at the geological map. The area shaded in gray is classified as quaternary landslide deposits, meaning the material here has moved in the last 10,000 years. To give you a better idea, here's a Google map of Southern California, and here's a Google Earth image. We'll zoom out for some perspective. You can see that the location is just west of Long Beach. From the footage, you can observe significant movement. In fact, this landslide is currently moving at a rate of 3 to 4 feet per month, or about 50 feet per year, which is astounding. You can see how one person's driveway is now about 10, maybe even 20 feet above the roadway. You'll also notice the large cracks, or scarps, forming across a vast area, nearly a mile long and a mile wide. Now, this map shows the rate of movement. The green areas indicate where the movement has slowed down, which corresponds to the shallower landslide material. The red areas represent deeper landslide material. This is part of an ancient landslide that, until recently, hadn't been moving, but has now been reactivated. There are also sections where the toe of the landslide has pushed out into the sea, extending roughly 500 feet, although they are preparing to conduct underwater measurements to determine exactly how far the toe extends from the shoreline. For reference, this point of land here is called Inspiration Point, and you can see the debris from the toe of the landslide moving offshore. Back in 2017, city officials initiated some remediation work. They refer to these efforts as hydrogeological interventions. This involved the installation of 2 horizontally drilled dewatering wells to extract groundwater in the Portuguese Bend landslide. The Portuguese Bend landslide is a smaller landslide area that's part of the larger Palos Verdes landslide complex, an ancient slide. To address the issue, they needed to drill more borings to determine the best locations for these horizontal drains, as the buildup of groundwater was creating excess pore water pressure, which was driving these landslides. What they discovered was that the upper landslide, which they were preparing to remediate, is about 165 feet deep. However, the much deeper ancient slide is located at a depth of 330 feet. From my research, this upper landslide movement dates back to 1956. When government officials were doing roadway work along the extension of Crenshaw Boulevard. It seems that they likely cut into the toe of the slope, and once that happens, movement can continue for a very long time. When cracks form in the surface, they're prone to filling with water from rainfall or leaks from utilities, which can further accelerate the slope's movement. Now, these horizontal drains they were planning to install each cost around $5 million. To put that in perspective, the city's overall budget is about $35 million per year. Here's a close-up of the landslide cross-section. After some analysis, they realized they needed to drill additional borings and switch to a different type of remediation, vertical dewatering wells. They plan to drill 9 additional borings to ensure they can properly locate the areas with high pore water pressures and place the relief wells deep enough. Currently, they're deciding whether to use smaller casings, which are cheaper to install. However, if these casings shear off due to continued movement, they could re-drill or ream them out. Alternatively, they could opt for more expensive, larger diameter casings, but the downside is that once they go with the larger size, they may be limited in their options for enlarging the wells in the future. It's kind of a one-and-done scenario, because once the casing shears off, it has to be replaced entirely. They're conducting subsurface investigations as we speak, but it's not happening quickly enough for the homeowners, and I really feel for them. It's a tough situation. Many people have had their utilities shut off. Some have had their gas cut off, and now around 200 people have lost power. It's unclear how long these outages will continue, but the electricity was turned off to prevent any potential wildfires caused by a spark. Presumably, once fire season is over, power might be restored, but that's still up in the air. You can see there are some above-ground utilities, which I believe are sewer lines. Due to the slope movement, there have been ruptures, and in one incident, 10,000 gallons of raw sewage spilled out. Quite a mess. Let's take a look at some of the areas currently impacted. This road section here is right in the middle of the most rapidly accelerating portion of the slide, which is located at a depth of 330 feet. On August 20th, 2024, the city of Rancho Palos Verdes held a city council meeting to discuss the technical aspects of the landslide and the plans moving forward. Residents were also able to voice their concerns and ask questions. Interestingly, the mayor of the city is an engineer, which is not something you often see in government. His background is quite relevant here, as it allows him to communicate technical details clearly to those affected. One interesting point during the meeting was the mayor's criticism of the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, for not looking into the situation. The mayor also noted that the state geologist hasn't visited the city to assess the landslide. I thought, wow, is this a Republican stronghold in Southern California that I wasn't aware of? So I looked up the area, and sure enough, it's overwhelmingly blue, like much of California, especially the coastal and southern regions. I think the mayor's frustration stems from the fact that this is a technical issue that could be addressed through proper evaluation and data gathering, but most importantly, they need government funding to fix it. Or at least, that's what they're asking for. They're talking about emergency installations of horizontal drains in 2 different arrays, and soon they'll begin work on the vertical wells, likely within the next month or so. During the city council meeting, it was also mentioned that they're going to extend the moratorium on new construction in the landslide area. I'm surprised this wasn't done a long time ago, but they're looking to extend it for another 12 months, which seems prudent given the circumstances. To give you an idea of the stakes, the average home price in Rancho Palos Verdes is around $1.9 million. One thing I've been wondering is whether insurance will cover these losses. Some people have already been forced to leave their homes, and they likely won't be able to return. From what I found during my research, the question was whether home and business insurance coverage for landslides is the same as for mudflows. The answer, in essence, is no. Neither is typically covered under a standard policy. A landslide is considered an earth movement event, similar to an earthquake, and is excluded from standard homeowners and business insurance policies. However, you can purchase what's called a difference in conditions (DIC) policy, which usually provides all-in-one coverage for landslides, mudflows, earthquakes, and floods. Now, how many of the 450 to 500 homeowners do you think have this extra insurance? I'd bet very few of them do. It also raises the question, why are lenders giving out loans to buy homes in this area? Granted, many of these homes were purchased in the 1960s, and some residents may have been unaware that, from a geological standpoint, their subdivision was built on top of a landslide zone. It's clearly mapped as such on the geologic maps. Sometimes people assume landslides are dormant, only to find out later they aren't. It's kind of like living near a volcano. Take the people of Seattle, who live near Mount Rainier. Is Mount Rainier dormant? For now, yes, but not forever. This situation got me thinking. City officials have applied for funding from FEMA and are seeking various federal funds to address this issue. But, aside from the fact that government officials may have triggered the landslide back in the 1950s, they've been involved in remediation efforts ever since. They've approved grading projects, granted building permits, and allowed people to live in homes here. At what point do we say this just isn't sustainable? How long can we keep pouring hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars into a situation that is unlikely to last? It reminds me of Hurricane Katrina and the subsequent flooding of New Orleans in 2005. How much should we invest in areas where natural disasters seem inevitable? I mean, it was a massive disaster. At the time of Katrina, the population of New Orleans was around 450,000. After the evacuations, that number dropped to just over 200,000. It slowly climbed back up, but it's now decreasing again, hovering around 350,000 people today. I remember at the time, there were discussions about whether it made sense for the federal government to spend billions of dollars to rebuild levees and implement other flood control measures to protect a city that's essentially 10 feet below sea level. The few voices raising those concerns were quickly shouted down and accused of having nasty motivations, but I think it was a fair policy point. How sustainable is it to live in a coastal city in the US that's 10 feet below sea level? We already saw in 2005 that the flood control measures, due to political pressure and cost-cutting, failed miserably. So, at this city council meeting, it was interesting to see affected homeowners deeply troubled by being displaced, not knowing when they could return to their homes. I really feel for them. Then, there were other interest groups, like the individual who spoke about the road closure for two-wheel vehicles. The city closed about a 2-mile stretch of roadway because of cracking and other signs of distress, and this person, respectfully, said it wasn't right to close the road just to motorcycles and bicycles. It's an interesting point, especially considering that I've covered the Teton Pass landslide, where a motorcyclist actually crashed because a large crack opened up in the road. Time seems to be working against the people in this part of California when it comes to stabilizing the slope. We're heading into the rainy season, and it's highly likely that the new rainfall this fall and winter will infiltrate the scarps and cracks on the hillside, further accelerating the landslide movement. I just don't see how there's enough time to implement any remediation measures before they're fighting against the weather. What do you think? Let me know in the comments section. We are working on a lot of interesting stories and follow-ups on previous ones, so stay tuned for future videos.